Take a look at this object and tell me honestly, what do you think it is? An antique gynecological chair? A bizarre Victorian invention? Some kind of rocking toy? What you see here is a chair created for erotic adventures involving not 2 people, but 3. And it was personally designed by King Edward VII for his encounters with his mistresses, of whom he had no fewer than 50 throughout his lifetime. Considering what Bertie looked like in his portraits, that level of enthusiasm may come as a surprise. Unfortunately for his wife, Queen Alexandra, it was all too real. She spent years enduring his affairs and the humiliations that came with them. In this video, we'll look at some of the filthiest royal affairs in history and the queens who were forced to suffer through them. So before we begin, leave a like for these women, rather than for me, and let's get started. For centuries, noblemen were allowed far more in marriage than women ever were. While a wife's infidelity was considered almost unthinkable and deeply shameful, a husband having affairs or even fathering children outside of marriage was often viewed as something entirely acceptable. And when it came to kings who seemed to be allowed almost anything, becoming involved with them was, for many women, both the ultimate ambition and a powerful social elevator. But among all the pleasure-seeking monarchs, there were some who managed to elevate marital infidelity to an entirely different level and make their wives' lives utterly miserable through their endless affairs. One such king was Louis XIV, the Sun King, who seemed to enjoy romantic pleasures even more than war and art. Paradoxically, a man known for his boundless energy and passionate nature was given a wife who was his complete opposite. Maria Theresa of Spain, a woman raised in the strict etiquette and of a rigid formality of the Spanish court. Their marriage was part of the Pyrenees Peace Agreement between France and Spain, signed after nearly 30 years of war. The bride and groom themselves were also very closely related. In fact, they were double first cousins. Louis's father, Louis XIII, was the brother of Maria Theresa's mother, while his mother, Anne of Austria, was the sister of Maria Theresa's father. Then again, Maria Theresa was a Habsburg princess, and among the Habsburgs, that level of family connection was hardly enough to surprise anyone. And so, on June 9, 1660, the royal wedding took place. During the first year of their marriage, Louis seemed genuinely enchanted by his wife, and the couple spent every night together. But little by little, it became clear that they were completely mismatched as a couple. Maria Theresa was a deeply religious woman, reserved, proud, and fiercely attached to her Spanish heritage. Despite spending the rest of her life at the French court, she never truly mastered the French language and preferred the company of her Spanish ladies-in-waiting, her dwarfs, and her beloved dogs. Politics held little interest for her. Before long, Louis grew bored and returned to the carefree lifestyle he had enjoyed before marriage. One of the most famous affairs of that period was his relationship with Louise de la Vallière, which lasted 6 years and resulted in the birth of 4 children. It should be said, however, that while Louis's mother, Queen Mother Anne of Austria, was still alive, the passionate king at least tried to keep his affairs discreet. He regularly received stern lectures from his mother, who did everything she could to support and protect Maria Theresa. In those early years of marriage, Maria Theresa also fought against her husband's infidelity in her own way. She sent her servants to spy on his movements, and on one occasion, with the help of one of her ladies-in-waiting, she even tried to prevent him from reaching his mistress by having bolts installed on the bedroom door. The incident angered Louis so much that he banished the unfortunate lady-in-waiting from court. Yet, it was around this same time that Louis made a promise to his wife. He assured her that he would only live this kind of libertine lifestyle until the age of 30, and that afterward he would become a devoted and faithful husband. Do you think he kept that promise? Of course he didn't. But the real humiliations for Maria Theresa were still ahead of her. After the king's mother died, Louis threw himself into his affairs with even less restraint than before. He forced his wife to accept both Louise de la Vallière and his new favourite, Madame de Montespan, as ladies-in-waiting. As if that were not enough, he openly travelled with his wife and his 2 mistresses at the same time. Watching this spectacle, people whispered, sometimes mockingly, and sometimes with genuine concern. The king is taking 3 queens out for a walk. Now, Louise was gentle by nature and made at least some effort not to flaunt her status as maitresse en titre, the king's official mistress. The very existence of such a position may seem shocking to modern women, but it had been a recognised institution at the French court since the 14th century. Madame de Montespan, however, was an entirely different story. She was no meek and humble favourite. Through a mixture of ambition and cunning, she became the king's mistress, while both the Queen and Louise were pregnant. Before long, she had begun referring to herself as the true Queen of France, thanks to the enormous influence she wielded over both Louis and the court. At Versailles, Madame de Montespan occupied 20 rooms, exactly twice as many as the legitimate queen. She maintained a court of her own, where ministers, generals, and ambassadors considered it an honour to be received. Her servants, her carriages, and her receptions rivaled those of royalty itself. Just imagine how humiliating all of this must have been for Maria Theresa. During her 13-year relationship with Louis XIV, Madame de Montespan gave birth to 7 of his children. 4 of them survived into adulthood and were later legitimised by the king. And perhaps this is one of the saddest parts of Maria Theresa's story. Over the course of their marriage, she gave Louis 6 children of her own. But because those children were, in a sense, victims of generations of royal inbreeding, born to parents who were extremely closely related, only one of them, Louis, the Grand Dauphin, survived childhood and reached adulthood. Just imagine what it must have been like to lose your children one after another while your husband's pregnant mistresses walked the halls of the court, giving birth to healthy babies year after year. It was only toward the end of the Queen's life that her husband began treating her with kindness again, and even then, it happened largely because of the influence of his new favourite, Madame de Maintenon. Touched by this unexpected change, Maria Theresa once said, "God created Madame de Maintenon to give me back the king's heart. Never has he treated me with such tenderness as he has since he began listening to her." But this long-awaited marital harmony, after 33 years of marriage, did not last for very long. Maria Theresa died at the age of 44 after suddenly developing an abscess beneath her arm. The doctors treated it with bloodletting and, in all likelihood, introduced an additional infection. Within just a few days, she was dead. On her deathbed, she spoke the heartbreaking words, "Although I was a queen, I had only one happy day in my life." I've always wondered which day she meant. After his wife's funeral, Louis made a remark that has puzzled historians ever since. "This is the first sorrow she has ever caused me." Perhaps it was the genuine grief of a man mourning a wife he had never truly appreciated while she was alive. Yet, only 2 months later, he secretly married his longtime mistress, Madame de Maintenon. On February 5th, 1880, an explosion rocked the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. The bomb had been intended to kill the Russian Tsar, Alexander II. At that very moment, his wife, Empress Maria Alexandrovna, who was slowly dying of tuberculosis after nearly 40 years of marriage, was resting in her apartments, unaware of what had happened. Yet, after such a terrifying attack, her husband did not rush to see whether she was safe. Instead, he hurried to the rooms of his mistress, a woman nearly 30 years younger than him, who lived in the very same palace together with their illegitimate children. And honestly, I think I could end the story right there, because that detail alone tells you a great deal about why Alexander II deserves a place among history's worst unfaithful husbands. But let's continue. What's particularly remarkable is that this future faithless husband almost ended up becoming the husband not of the German Princess Maria, but of Queen Victoria herself. Back when Victoria had only recently ascended the throne and had not yet met Prince Albert, Alexander was travelling across Europe. During that journey, he arrived in London, where the young queen and the tall, blue-eyed Russian Grand Duke met and immediately took a liking to one another. Victoria wrote in her diary, "The Grand Duke pleases me very much. He is natural and cheerful. One feels at ease with him. I am delighted. At a ball held in honour of the visitors, Victoria did something that was considered almost scandalously bold for the time. She danced with Alexander several times and even offered him a seat beside her between dances. But no matter how strong the attraction between the two young people may have been, the match was never destined to happen. To marry the queen of another country, Alexander would have had to renounce his claim to the Russian throne. So instead, he turned his attention to a far less complicated bride, Princess Maximiliane of Hesse-Darmstadt. Their first meeting was hardly the stuff of fairy tales. Maximiliane was not trying to attract his attention at all. In fact, she was simply sitting quietly and eating cherries when the Russian prince unexpectedly approached her. Caught off guard, she had no choice but to spit a cherry pit discreetly into her hand before answering him. For some reason, Alexander found this moment utterly charming. It revealed a naturalness and sincerity that impressed him, far more than any carefully rehearsed courtly performance. After meeting her, he wrote to his parents, "I love her, and I would sooner give up the throne than give her up. I shall marry only her. That is my decision." And for the first years of their marriage, they truly were happy. After converting to Orthodoxy, Maximiliane became Maria Alexandrovna and quickly adapted to life at the Russian court. With her modesty, kindness, and gentle nature, she won over almost everyone around her. Even people who disliked the Russian imperial family often spoke warmly of Maria. Such was the positive impression she made on those who met her. But over time, their relationship began to deteriorate, especially after the death of their eldest son. The loss devastated the empress. She withdrew into herself completely and seemed to go through life almost mechanically, never truly recovering from her grief. And it was precisely at that moment that her husband began taking mistresses. His most notorious and controversial affair was with a young woman named Catherine Dolgorukova. When Alexander first saw her walking in a garden, she was only 17 years old, while he was nearly 50. Before their relationship became romantic, they met frequently during walks in the gardens, and the emperor could hardly believe that such a young girl might genuinely fall in love with him. Yet, over time, their relationship grew into something much larger, almost a second family existing alongside the first. To be fair, there does seem to have been genuine affection between them. Their correspondence has survived to this day, and they exchange letters almost daily. Many of them are remarkably tender and openly passionate. Still, I think most of us would agree that this love story leaves a rather uncomfortable aftertaste, especially when you consider the enormous age difference and the fact that Alexander already had both a wife and a family. Catherine eventually gave Alexander 4 children, and he installed her in the very same palace where his legitimate family lived. He even had a private elevator constructed, allowing him to travel directly from his own apartments to hers whenever he wished. Naturally, this arrangement was deeply humiliating for Maria. She could now hear the footsteps and laughter of her husband's children by another woman echoing through the very corridors of her own home. But Maria was an extraordinarily gentle and patient woman, accustomed to enduring hardship in silence, and so she continued to do exactly that. The bombing at the Winter Palace, when Alexander chose to run to his mistress instead of his wife, had a devastating effect on Maria. The shock and anxiety for her husband took a heavy toll on her already fragile health. In the end, she could no longer continue her battle against tuberculosis and passed away. After the empress's death, a touching letter addressed to her husband was discovered among her personal belongings. In it, she thanked him for the years they had spent together. Less than 2 months later, Alexander married his beloved Catherine without even waiting the customary mourning period required by propriety. But the happiness they had built upon another woman's suffering did not last long. Less than a year later, the emperor was assassinated, and the newly widowed Catherine left Russia with her children. There is a Russian proverb that says, "The mouse's tears will one day be repaid to the cat." Perhaps this was exactly that moment. This British king earned the nickname the Caresser. Unfortunately for his wife, all those caresses were usually reserved for his mistresses. rather than for the woman who spent more than 40 years married to him. Depending on which historian you believe, he had somewhere between 50 and 100 lovers over the course of his life. And, of course, I am talking about Edward VII, the very king with whom I began this story. From a very young age, Bertie was a constant source of disappointment to his parents, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Unlike his older sister, he was not particularly diligent in his studies. He had a quick temper, and in general, he failed to fit the image of the perfect Victorian child that the royal couple had hoped to raise. But if small children bring small problems, then grown children bring much larger ones. And once Bertie reached adulthood, he became a very real headache for his parents. At the very time when Victoria and Albert had begun searching for a suitable bride for their son, firmly believing that marriage would somehow set him on the right path, the future king embarked on his first serious affair with an actress. Furious, Prince Albert travelled to Cambridge to confront his son and try to bring him to his senses. It was November, and the two men spent a long time walking outdoors while having their difficult conversation. Albert's health had already been fragile for some time, and the journey appears to have taken a serious toll on him. 2 weeks later, he fell ill with typhoid fever, and a week after that he was dead. Queen Victoria was devastated. For the rest of her life, she blamed her son for the death of the man she loved more than anyone else. "Oh, that boy. I never can or shall look at him without a shudder," she wrote. Perhaps in an effort to please his grieving mother and honour the memory of his father, Bertie proposed to Princess Alexandra of Denmark in September of the following year. Although Edward was in many ways pushed into marriage, you could say that he was extraordinarily lucky. His young bride was not only deeply in love with Bertie, but also blessed with a cheerful disposition and an easygoing nature. The first years of their marriage were genuinely happy. The couple established a separate household, spent much of their time attending social events and entertainments, and before long, children began arriving as well. In many respects, Alexandra really did have a positive influence on her husband. Unfortunately, family life quickly lost its appeal for the prince. He spent more and more time in the company of questionable friends and women of dubious reputation, becoming a regular visitor to London's brothels. Perhaps the saddest part of this story is that by recklessly involving himself with so many different women, Bertie could hardly avoid contracting sexually transmitted diseases, which were extremely common in an era before modern medicine and contraception. There have long been theories that he may have infected Alexandra with either syphilis or gonorrhea. And I do want to emphasise the word may, because this remains only a theory. Historians who support it point to some of Alexandra's later health problems, including chronic rheumatic illness and her progressive deafness, which can sometimes develop as long-term complications of such diseases. Of course, Alexandra's medical records were seen only by her physicians, and only they could have known the truth with certainty. But if the theory is correct, it makes her story all the more tragic, considering what a loyal and devoted wife she was to him. Edward certainly did not abandon his romantic adventures as he grew older. Even after he had become considerably heavier and was approaching 60 years of age, the king continued his pursuits. It was during this period that he met the woman who would become the last great love of his life, Alice Keppel, a woman nearly 30 years younger than him, and, incidentally, the great-grandmother of today's Queen Camilla. Of all Edward's mistresses, Alice was the one who managed to build the best relationship with Alexandra. The Queen herself admitted that Alice had a remarkable ability to calm her husband's emotional outbursts and keep him in good spirits. Over time, Alice even began to play a small role in politics, occasionally persuading her royal lover to receive a particular ambassador or support a certain course of action. When Edward fell gravely ill, Alexandra somehow found the strength to forgive him. She remained by his side during the final hours of his life, personally holding an oxygen tube to help him breathe. She even allowed Alice Keppel to come and say goodbye to the man they had both loved, and in that moment, she once again proved who the true queen had always been. For a long time, I thought the saddest part of these stories was the infidelity, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe the saddest part was that so many of these women spent their lives loving men who never truly valued them. Still, I don't want this video to end with pity, because every woman we've talked about today was far more than a betrayed wife. They were queens, mothers, patrons, leaders, and remarkable individuals in their own right. Perhaps in the end, these women were not the real losers in these stories. The real loss belonged to the men who traded loyalty, devotion, and genuine love for fleeting pleasures. If you know other stories of shocking royal affairs, leave them in the comments. I'd love to make a second part. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.